Good afternoon, friends. Welcome back to this ongoing series of interview preparation. All right. And we had in the past seen some generic questions. Today we specifically look at a particular topic of supervised learning. All right. And as part of this, we have already seen some of the classification models. Today we will spend some time on the regression models and get into the details of that. So let us begin. I'm assuming some of you are already aware with 360-digit MG's course curriculum and what are the things that we offer. And participants who are already students of 360-digit MG will be able to relate to this AI Sprite, the learning management system that is provided to them. But nevertheless, we will try and explain. I'll try and explain about it in the perspective of this AI Sprite and also with reference to the other questions that is there. All right. So one of the common questions that people ask, or one of the common fundamentals, now whether people will ask or what is the common questions or what is it asked, let us, rather than getting into the details of that, I'm going to stick to what are the fundamentals that you need to really be thorough about. All right. So let me just make note of this. All right. Just use a screen on top. All right. Linear regression, which is the topic at hand. All right. So one of the things that the explanation that you need to be having a thorough understanding is causality and correlation. All right. Pardon the spelling. All right. Causality and correlation. Now, how do you address this particular question is primarily causality is through domain knowledge and correlation is through statistical knowledge. Statistical knowledge. All right. So that is something that you must be very clear about. All right. And it is all right to give some kind of examples about the causality and these things. And the reason why I'm impressing upon or spending so much time here is you will not get direct questions in interview. Can you explain the difference between causality and correlation? You will at best get a question to explain about the steps that you're going to follow with reference to a regression model. It is expected that when you are explaining the steps towards the regression model, you spend some time talking about the causality and the correlation. If you are going to skip it, in all probability, the person may not notice it. The person may not notice what it is. But if you do mention it, you're going to get brownie points out of it. All right. So that is something that you may want to ensure that you mention. All right. Then, of course, hypothetical questions with reference to what to do if the correlation is not good. All right. Now, again, there is no clear-cut answer with reference to if correlation is not good or bad, because the other thing that you must respond. Now, for instance, let me make a note of that. Correlation between so the ideal answer that you need to give here is, now when you hear the question, what if the correlation between the input and the output is poor? How poor, you may want to ask, let's say 0.5 or 0.7 or sorry 0.3 or things like that. So immediately what you need to ask is that even if the correlation was good, we may not always get a good model depending on only one of the input variables, right? Having only one input variable and trying to depend on that may not always give us the good model. We'll have to probably look at other input variables. Is it possible through feature selection? Is it possible through a little more study? Can I get hold of other variables? Then they are going to say that no, this is the only variable that exists. You have to come up with a simple linear regression model. Then what is the answer? What do we do for this kind of scenario? The answer for this kind of scenario is, the EDA of the output and the input, which is the univariate analysis, univar analysis, will give us, will give insights and further course of action. All right, will give insights and further course of action. So these are some of the things that you can use to your benefit with reference to responding to these kind of questions. Okay, that is with reference to the poor correlation. And another thing that is there is this is a common thing that people get into the trap. They have done some examples on various modeling techniques, and they'll probably speak more about the modeling. But what are all the things? And obviously, you will be able to answer this question only if you have enough experience with various assignments and projects about what are the problems you have faced. So what you need to do, you need to probably even narrate In EDA, we can have this problem, this problem, this problem. If you have this particular problem of, let us say, the scale, then the min-max scaling, while is very, very good, is not always best, because the distance measure is not so well. Also, it is difficult to evaluate the model. So therefore, standardization, which is the x minus mu by sigma method of transformation, would be better. Then in the EDA, sometimes we may have very high skewness, a very long tail. All right. Now, if you have a very long tail, especially if you are talking about a right tail, all right, and oftentimes data is, most of the finance related data is often a right tail data. If you're talking about profits, if you're talking about anything, very rarely you will have data which is left skewed or left tailed. You'll always have right skewed data. So therefore, we may go for a standard log transformation, or probably a Johnson transformation, which has some variants of it. You can go for it to get a symmetrical data. The existence of data symmetry, or the making the data a little normal, is going to help us to improve the correlation, and the correlation in the essential form of 0.55 may even go up to 0.7, 0.75 as well. So we cannot simply leave it at 0.55. We need to take the other things as well. One of the finest interviews that I had taken was as candidate who I had started with a specific question of which model do you prefer, because generally the question is generally asked, which is that modeling technique you prefer, and what is that, why is it the good model, or things like that. When you look at that, he had answered the question with, he had chosen a specific model, and then he went on into a 3 to 5 minute speech as to why he has chosen that particular model, what is the reason, what are the advantages, what are the disadvantages. I mean, he had ensured, that particular candidate had ensured that on that specific, I mean, he had chosen decision tree basically. So on decision tree, the interviewer should not ask any more questions. He had practically covered everything. And therefore, this is what happens, and therefore this happens. Sometimes this happens, therefore we address this. So I have done, he wrapped it up. He ended the entire discussion, because I have spent so much time, and I love this thing. There is so much research I have done, and every time I come to know about some difficulty in using the decision tree models, I also come up with the ways to counter it. So that is the amazing thing. So I might have also, if you have attended my other sessions of the interview preparedness, the opportunity when an interviewer asks a question, it is not to know the answer of the question. It's not something that he doesn't know. It is not a viva voce where your college professor is testing you as to how much you know. He's also looking at an opportunity of you to communicate with him and try to explain to them how good a candidate you are. All right. And shows your preparedness for research and preparedness for going into the depths of it. If you're going to be giving monosyllable answers, you've asked me this question, it's not wrong. You're given every single question the answer correctly, but to the point, then it can be perceived as, you know, a person who will not take pains, a person who will not go above and beyond the expectations, and therefore they may be a little worry about hiring you. So that's one important tip that I'm trying to pass into that. Now coming back to our discussion about the regression. All right. So regression, correlation analysis. All right. There was one specific incident where a person had asked about the formula. Now, I still find it a little strange. Why would somebody ask the formula for correlation? Must be somebody who is not very good at conducting interviews. But given that there has been a precedence where one of my participants has come back and said, "Sir, you kept saying not to answer," and then this fellow is asking me the formula for correlation. I think now I will change my stand. Yes, you may want to find out the formula for correlation, and you may want to, you know, yeah, that is one thing. Okay, and the next is the formula with reference to the model building, the beta naught and beta 1. Now, if you have done your mathematical foundations, the origin or the derivation of this particular formula also is pretty much there. It is obtained through the optimization method. All right. Now, while we talk about the ordinary least squares as a method of finding the line of best fit, it is also expected that you know how is the model built. While OLS is correct, using optimization, minimization of the error function. All right, so that is a little more detail that is now expected from the participants. All right. OLS, of course, what do you mean by OLS? I think we did not have to discuss. I'm sure all of you should be having a thorough understanding of what OLS is and what is the analogy and why we take the square of the errors if it is only to remove the errors. I'll give you some questions that you may want to dwell upon. Why take the square of errors and not take the absolute value of the difference? All right. Any idea what is the answer to that? One moment, my chat is a little refreshing. One moment, my chat is. Sorry. Okay. So the answer for that is not there. People have not given the answer here. I'll give you the answer, and then meanwhile, I'll also address some of the questions that are being posted there. Now, you can try to give the analogy of variance and standard deviation. All right. Variance and standard deviation. So variance as a measure exists, all right, because it is mathematically stable, all right. More than the absolute function, the variance measure is considered to be mathematically stable, and almost all the analysis, whether it is ANOVA, analysis of variance, or whether you're talking about the F distribution or various distributions, they use the squared of the differences or the squared of the error, all right, rather than the absolute error. Okay, so mathematically that is how it has been for that is what it is, and therefore it is why it is working on that. Avoiding negative values can be done in you can avoid the negative values purely by doing the absolute as well, but that is not the only answer. The answer is because mathematically it is more robust to square the values, and most of the probability distribution functions use squared values rather than the absolute values. So that reason we try to keep it that way. That is why we take the ordinary least squares. Now we have a question on use of transformation. Do we lose the power to draw inferences? All right. Now the inferences are something that you come to at the end when you have gotten the model. All right. Now all you need to do when you are doing some transformation, let us say you're doing a log transformation or a sine or a trigonometric transformation to the input variable to improve the R square. All right. So the inferences can be drawn in the perspective of the transformed value. All right. The logged value of the input is having a very high correlation with the output. The correlation is close to the relationship between them is the relationship or the multiplication factor, or which is basically the slope or the beta 1 is 3.6. Let us say if you have the equation, let me write it down for you in the transformation. Let me just continue here. So assume your y is equal to beta naught plus beta 1 log x1. Now if you want to do the draw inferences, let us say beta 1 is equal to 3.6. All right. So it simply implies that the logged value of the input is changing the output by a factor of 3.6. So a unit increase in the logged value of the output increases the output by 3.6. I mean, you still can draw the inferences. Only thing is you will have to ensure that you are mentioning it there. Now, this is of course for simple transformations. What if I go for complex transformation or polynomial form? All right. What is that? What is it? What is it that we are going to be doing? Now, obviously, when you are doing polynomial transformation, the explainability, as it is called, is a little bit difficult. Am I communicating? All right. So that being said, let's move on to the next thing. Now, there have been a lot of instances where people have asked, interviewers have asked to explain in great detail the difference between the R square and adjusted R square and multiple R square. All right. While many people explain the theory behind it, that R square or multiple R square assumes that uh, every input variable being added into the system is going to perform, and therefore it continues to increase, whereas adjusted R square only takes into consideration the inputs contribution to the model. And so let me just mention that. use shortcut multiple R square multiple R square versus adjusted R square. All right, if you look at this, now we all know the explanation for this, all right, but the expectation is how the immediate follow-up question that the interviewer is asking is how. Now, one option is know the formula for adjusted R square. This is one option. You can probably rattle out the function. But even if you rattle out the equation of the adjusted R square, they are not going to be impressed by it. All right. So they are going to be expecting some detailed explanation. So once again, optimization function using the error optimization using the error function. All right, now let me just show you that. Just give me a moment while I share that thing. All right, so here we go. We have the adjusted R square, which is a function of the, the R square. And then we look at the other factors with reference to the errors. All right, so this is something that you may want to rattle off, but ultimately you'll have to give a little more explanation with reference to optimization. All right. Okay. So that being said, let us go back to the regression. Okay. Explanation about another question that at least I have asked, and then the students also have had difficulty in answering them when I take mock interviews is, why do we need R square? Why is the error function not good enough? All right. Why do we need another measure called R square? Why can't we simply take the RMSE or MAPE value? Why is that not good enough? Any idea for this answer? Okay, so the explanation for this question is, while the model's accuracy as a measure is good enough, I'm sorry, the model's accuracy with reference to the RMSE or MAPE is good enough, we require another function called R square to explain the quality of the model, because that will also help us to understand about the goodness of, and also try to tell us a little bit about the absence or presence of overfitting in the model. All right. So therefore, it is important to use that particular measure as well. It is not only so, also the explanation is you may, through a random chance, have a good accuracy for a specific set of input variables being subject to the model. But how good is that model's ability to predict for future values is what talks about the R square, or which talks about the SSR, the sum of squared regression, which is the numerator part of the R squared value. So that is something is also important. It's not just the error. All right. So if the accuracy of the data with which the model has been built is very, very, very high, it does not always mean that the model is good. The model could be a very, very a weak model, or it could have a very, very poor slope. So the predictability for the future values may not always be there. All right. So that is another thing. All right. Absolutely. RMSE could also be influenced by outliers, but I'm looking at the argument that I'm trying to put here is if the RMSE is very good, or forget the RMSE. RMSE is a little subjective given that we'll have to probably do multiple models to be able to compare the RMSE. What if we took the MAPE values? All right. Now, if we took the MAPE values and if the MAPE value was very low, let us say 0.03 0.03 mean absolute percentage error, or if you don't multiply it by 100 or 3% or 0.03 or whatever. Now it is a very good model, right? 97% accuracy is a very good model. Why do I still need an R squared value? That is where the argument is. Now, for that, you will have to give the explanation that how the model also, you can probably understand this in a two-dimensional scenario. In a two-dimensional scenario, if the slope of the model is very poor and the dispersion between the data points is very, very less, that is, it is all close to the model line, then your RMSE or MAPE value will be very, very low. So you will be tempted to believe that the model is good. All right. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that what if now if you have data like this, and the line going through that particular data is the model of the regression model, let us assume, to make things very, very simple, it is through a random chance that the accuracies are good. But in reality, when you have more data, for instance, if data were to, the real life data, when it probably comes here and things like that, your model will fail miserably. Therefore, I also need to look at the model slope. All right. How much it is able to explain, by what improvement, the changes in the input X, what is the influence on the input Y. So what do I need to do? If my R square is pretty low, all right, this will have a low R square, all right. So when even though the RMSE is pretty decent, the R square will be pretty low. So what do I need to do? I need to do some transformation. In the process of transformation, what happens? Maybe these data points, the original red data points, this is of course the test data that I brought in. The original red data points may, after transformation, become something like this. Now, when the data becomes like this, the model's slope increases. The RMSE is affected slightly. Definitely, the RMSE is also affected. But the overall R square is going to improve massively. Therefore, if your transformed values, the test data, now I had mentioned about some test data which were, let us say, are here. Those test data, let me mention it in green, if they also come, the model is still able to do a reasonably good job of predicting them, unlike the first scenario. And the second scenario is definitely better. Are we good? So that is with reference to the R square value. And the other thing that is prediction interval and confidence interval. Why do we need interval at all in the first place when we are never going to use them? Is a quite a common question, because for all practical purposes, you can use any regression method. Firstly, please remember that simple linear regression is practically non-existent in real life. All right. Now, it is an evolutionary process you are modeling. You try with the simple linear regression with no transformation whatsoever, and then you keep going progressively. All right. So transformation of the input variable, transformation of the output variable, transformation of both the variables, adding features, which is the polynomial form, trying to add more features, x, x square, x cube, log x, exponential of x, etc. You're going on adding to it. It is basically adding more features is one other method. But when you try to, ultimately, what is the measurement, right? The explainability, or how to explain what that particular model is done, is through the MAPE value and the R square. The R square is the ability for future values as well, whereas MAPE is specifically for the ability of the model is basically I'm sorry, the RMSE, sorry, the R square is the ability of the model to be able to predict for future values, and MAPE or RMSE is simply the accuracy measurement for that specific data, or for that train or test data. All right, so that is why we go in for this. Okay, now coming back to why do we need prediction and confidence intervals when for all practical purposes we never use the interval values. All right, now the reason for this prediction and confidence interval is to primarily for the real life scenarios where we are going to be deploying the models to our customer, and we are going to give them a good margin across that, all right, with a plus minus range. That is one thing. And also it is representative of the expectation of the model's quality or accuracy. Now, for instance, we generally use the thumb rule of 95% accuracy because that is what it is, but we may also use 90%, we may also use 70% confidence, all right, depending on the kind of the domain that we are working on, or even go up to 99% of it. All right, so that's essentially the measure. So to have that kind of confidence, all right, to be able to have 99% confidence, obviously the interval is going to be that much wider for the same values. All right, so I'm going to give me such a big range for an input, which can be just about as good as saying minus infinity. What is the prediction? What is the, if I have, let us say, somebody whose tumor's diameter is so much, can you predict how much time does he have to live? So anywhere between minus infinity to plus infinity is the answer, because we have taken the interval so wide. Now obviously that is absolutely useless. All right, so we'll have to qualify the interval along with a very good accuracy, train and test accuracy is very good, absolutely no overfit. All those things you'll have to qualify together, and there are multiple things to be looked at and not just one. So that's essentially what it is. Okay. Right. So the difference between prediction and confidence interval, I'm assuming all of you, uh, are aware. It is pretty trivial. All right. So nevertheless, I'll answer it. Oh dear, spelling mistakes. I'm sorry. So all right, prediction and confidence interval. Each inputs this talks about the model's limits. All right. So that is something. Okay. All right. Then of course we have the modeling methods, etc., and we have talked about the transformation and polynomial form. All right. So all right. Then of course continuing our discussion with reference to the multiple linear regression or the simple linear regression, we also have something what is known as the line requirements, wherein the most important aspect within the line requirements, all right, is with reference to the errors and with reference to the predictors. These are the two predominant things that we talk about it. Sometimes we also talk about the parameters, but that is not taken into too much of consideration. All right, and various visualizations that are required for this. All right, why should the variance be constant? What happens if it is not constant? What we have learned is that the variance should be constant. It should have homoscedasticity. It should not be heteroscedasticity. All right, that is something that we have learned. But why? All right, what is the reason for that? Anybody? Okay, I'm not getting responses. So basically, there is an issue, all right, of the concept of bias and variance, all right. The bias and variance aspects, all right, the bias and variance will be affected due to the heteroscedasticity. Now, what is bias and variance is something as of now we have not discussed as part of our interview preparation. We will be discussing in the subsequent sessions. But the other thing is you will have the problem of heteroscedasticity when the data, when the original data, one or more of the input variables are, not normally distributed. All right. Now, if you have, done your fundamentals of statistics, you will know that while in reality having normal distributions is practically impossible. There is practically no data wherein you have normal distribution, all right, but at the same time we expect everything to be um, we expect everything to be um, normally distributed, all right, and for that purpose we have the transformations, all right. The transformations themselves will be able to arrest the problem of problem of not normal distribution, and also arrest the problem of the errors being having the heteroscedasticity problem, and therefore it will become it will become homoscedasticity, all right. It will have constant variance. So that is another thing that is part of it, all right. All right. And as part of the regression modeling, all right, there's another aspect that there are various aspects which can be studied as part of the regression modeling. One of the aspects is of course the leverage, all right. Now, what does the leverage do, all right? What does the leverage intuitively perform or intuitively tell you? So let me just note down that. Sorry about that. All right, it tells us about the outlier data points. Now, um, there is a math behind it. I'm not getting into details at this point of time. All right, that you have something called as the Cook's distance, and if it is beyond a certain threshold value of the Cook's distance, it is indicative of that the data is violating, all right, and this falls under the category that entire data point, that entire record, the entire row falls under the category of an influential variable or something like an outlier, all right, and therefore that is what the leverage tells us. If all of them fall under a threshold value of the Cook's distance, they are all contributing to the model equally. Otherwise, they are behaving like an outlier and therefore influencing the model or pushing the model, trying, because of this which existence the model is getting, is being adjusted or pulled on a particular direction which is not desirable. All right, so that is essentially what we have here. Equal variance means data is having the same distance from the mean. No, not the data. Here, equal variance in this particular perception is talking about the variance of the errors, all the errors. Now, if I have, let us say, 100 records, with 100, I have 100 training records. With those 100 training records, I build a model. When I input those 100 inputs into the model, I'll get 100 outputs. Those 100 outputs will those 100 outputs, and the actual outputs will form an error. So I'll have E1, E2, E3, E4 all the way to E100. Now, if I were to look at the dispersion of the errors, and if they are highly dispersed or not uniformly dispersed, whatever the dispersion, if they are not uniform, then we have a heteroscedasticity problem. And this happens because the original data was not standardized. It could also be problem of scale, etc. Okay, so that's essentially what it is. All right. So some basics we have done with reference to the model assumptions, with reference to the linear regression. All right, we'll be discussing more on these topics very soon. Okay, we'll wrap it up here. If there are any questions, I'm available on chat. You can ask me. I'll be more than happy to respond. All right, then. I believe there's nothing more to add. So there are no questions in the chat also. So thank you so much. Please keep attending our session, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.